everybody, it's Dr. Ruff. Welcome to this week's mini lecture for Arctic and Phonology. Okay, so for this one, since we're kind of in that middle of the semester point, the assignments that you guys just turned in, the speech sample analysis and the assessment of the analysis that you guys wrote up, this is a really great kind of midpoint review to see how we're understanding diagnostics, therapy. Are we able to identify phonological processes? How are we going to make that clinical decision making for what we target first? What are appropriate age ranges? And you know the drill because you guys just completed both assignments. Now, remember, when we're doing these assignments, there are a multitude of resources out there. So it's best to use our book because you might find one research article that says a child ages out of something by age 3, and the very next moment you find that another article says they age out by 6 or 7. So there is inconsistent literature out there. So your best bet of getting that kind of like accurate tally of responses, like on a worksheet, is if you're kind of using that book as the primary resource. So I thought for this one, just reviewing the two assignments that you guys just did would be a really great review of all of these concepts. So that's what I'm going to do. Apologies that I'm not using a PowerPoint. There's something with Halo where I'm having trouble uploading like such a big file of video with PowerPoint. So for this one, I'm going to ask you to go and find your speech sample analysis as a resource. Later in the talk, I will also probably reference a phonological process chart that I attached. And then you also may want to reference your paper on the your analysis of your speech sample assessment, but that's not as important. The two main things that you kind of need to follow along with are the speech sample analysis that you just did for Julia, and also that kind of phonological process chart, but that will come later. So let's focus on the speech sample analysis now. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to go one by one. Now, normally I don't like to go into so much detail about what was right or what wasn't right. We're trying to keep the integrity of our assignments. And so I'm trusting you guys to make good choices with this information. But I felt like this one was really important because there were so many answers across the board. There were a lot of different types of errors, um, but it seemed like everybody, you guys were very close, maybe had one right, two wrong, or maybe you included one that you thought was right, but maybe you left off two, or maybe you gave me an example of something that was kind of right, but there was a more accurate selection you could have made. And really, I think the only way we're going to figure that out is if we like go through this assignment and talk through it. So this time I'm going to do that. Okay. So we're working together. I'm trusting you guys to make good choices with this information, but I think it's worth it at this point in the semester. So going to your speech sample analysis, let's just go down the chart. So for house, this one would have been initial consonant deletion and stopping. Okay, so what it would not have been, it would not have been, and I pulled all these would not have been from various examples from various different students, just kind of seeing the types of errors you guys are making. So it would not have been weak syllable deletion because we're not deleting a syllable. House out or house out, right? So there's no deletion there. It would not be final consonant deletion because we're not deleting the S. We're not saying how, we're saying out. So the T is present. So there is no final consonant deletion. It's a substitution at that point. And actually, it's a stopped S. And we're going to kind of talk about that because you're going to see that sometimes I might have said, oh, this isn't this, let's maybe use the term stopping as opposed to deprecation and depelletization. Um, while those terms are also correct, I think in the field you're going to more commonly see stopping. So if you're going to go ahead and use those terms, maybe also use stopping. So for example, if I saw both stopping and deaffrication, I didn't take points off. But I really want you to be using kind of that stopping term because that's the most common verbiage that we're going to be seeing in the field. Okay, so let's see. House, so change to out. Now this is not alveolarization because the s and the t are in the same place. They're both alveolar sounds. So that's not, alveolarization of any of the one of the two sounds because they're both alveolars. Okay, let's see. The omitted, somebody said omitted S. Well, we didn't omit the S, we stopped the S. We substituted the S with a T. That's another thing is I'm noticing sometimes we might just use the word omitted or substituted. And while that might be technically kind of what's happening, that's not enough information. We need to say what is the process that is happening. Like, yes, something has been removed, or yes, something has been changed, but how and what? Okay, let's see. Substituted T for out. Yeah, I think someone said fronting here, but that's not right because we did the initial consonant deletion, remove the H out. And for else, to out, we stopped that S. So it would not be a substitution for T for H. Okay, next one, pig. So this one was P. Final consonant deletion. Everybody did pretty well on this. Duck did great on this. Drum did great on this. Good job, guys. So that let's see, shoe. Like I know, like okay, let's see. I guess I'll go through and kind of talk about it. So pig was final consonant deletion. Pig got turned into pi. So we deleted the G, right? Um, duck got turned into dut. So that was the back sound, the alveolar sound, moved to an alveolar sound. So that was fronting. Drum. This one, again, I think most of you guys did a great job on this. I'm going to go ahead and talk about it because we're going to talk about when things are cluster reduction as opposed to cluster substitutions, or when a speech sound such as an affricate or a digraph are changed, in which case it's one sound change for another. So we'll talk about that more in the future. But let's just go ahead and say here that drum turned into dumb. So since we simplified that DR combination, removed the R, that was cluster reduction. Okay, shoe for two. That one was, let you think about it. Is that fricative, palatal fricative, shoe for two. So that was stopping. So that could be depalatalization, right? But really we are creating a depalatalization by stopping the sound. And when you are doing a lot of your phonological assessments, they're going to use the term stopping. So again, it's not wrong, but if you're going to choose to use terms like deaffrication, depalatalization, make sure you also include that kind of stopping term, just to cover your bases. Okay, and then that is here is where we are. I just want to make sure I'm checking myself because sometimes I do get a little creative. Yes, okay. So this is a great example. So shoe for two. Shoe, kind of simple. Maybe somebody was thinking simplifying the S and the H and turning it into a single phoneme. That's not correct because actually what we think is shoe is a digraph sound. So we consider that one phoneme. Just like cha, like chew. That is one phoneme that is an affricate. So what we would not consider anytime that one of those types of sounds is an error, we would not consider that a cluster reduction. Instead, we would say, why does that one phoneme, the SH digraph phoneme of sh, not sound like sh? Instead, it sounds like t. And the reason here is stopping, t. We stopped that kind of palatalized sound and turned it into a stop. Okay, so knife for knipe. Again, we stopped that. So I think someone here said a knife for knife. Someone said that's fronting. Well, it's not really fronting because it's still in that kind of labial section, right? Um, and then somebody said knife for knife was devoicing. But listen, they're both devoiced, so it's not devoicing. And let's see. So what that is it's the F fricative. That's stop sound again. We stopped the F. Okay. Slide for tie. This one was stopping because it's ta. We stopped it. But this one is because it's not an affricate and it's not a digraph. This one is a cluster reduction because it was two individual phonemes, s and ol, right? And we changed it to one phoneme, which was t. So in this case, this would be a cluster reduction. And then we said slide, tie. So not only did we stop the S, we cluster reduced, but we also, here we are doing a final consonant deletion. And I'll talk about this a little more down the road, or some of the other words. But when they say like water, and they make a vowel, they're actually not deleting that R, they're vowelizing it. They're still trying to put a sound there. They're not deleting the final sound, even though they're trying to put a vowel to kind of substitute that consonant. That would not be a final consonant deletion. But here, this is a true example of a final consonant deletion because they just chopped off that ending sound. Tie, the first slide. So you could imagine if the S and the L were still correct, if they said sly, and they just chop the D off, that's final consonant deletion. Okay, soap for taupe. Again, we're changing the S to a T, stopping it. Let's see. Oop, I have some information from a different word. And again, so here's one of those ones where somebody said maybe alveolarization, but S and T are both alveolar, so that wouldn't be right. And then they're both alveolars. They're not changing their placement. They're staying in the same exact place. They're just being produced from a fricative to a stop. So it wouldn't be fronting because our tongue isn't moving forward. Okay. Thumb for tum. This one, give me a second, is our favorite term. We're taking that thumb, which there's their air escape, and stopping it with a T, tum. Okay. And then so someone said partial cluster reduction. Here is that concept where in this case that would not be the case because this is actually a digraph. Like the TH are their own phoneme sound. They have their own IPA symbol. So we would consider this one sound. So they changed one sound from another to another, the sound to the t sound. And therefore that's why I was stopping and not cluster reduction. Teacher, teacher. Okay, so that was the t is fine. They're both starting T's. Teacher to teacher. So that's stopping. We stopped the T. And this is one of those ones where we wouldn't say it's final consonant deletion because they're what they really are doing is they are vowelizing the R's. This is vowelization. You will see this a lot on your kind of like your liquids, like your R's and your L's. In fact, if they vowelize on something else, it's considered an atypical phoneme. Like if they were to vowelize in just a completely different type of sound or letter phoneme, that would be considered atypical. But this one, because it's so common that they vowelize their R, if a child does this is considered to be, even though it might be developmentally delayed, it's a typical type of phonological error. So this was teacher, t. So they are trying to give you that R. It's just they vowelized it. So it's not a deletion. And then I can see how some people would say epenthesis, which is like kind of like putting the sound. But this is one of those instances where, like, yes, okay, technically it's an sound, but the more correct answer is that they are vowelizing that liquid. Do you see what I mean? So how there's some instances where one answer is maybe more correct than another. Um, and it's not gliding because that's when we add in like a W. Like if we were to say instead of tree, we say twee with like a W, that's gliding. Okay, zebra. So this one it was zebra. So deba is what they put. So z to d, right? We stop that sound. And then here is a cluster reduction. Zebra to zeba. So here, it's not vowelization because it's zeba, not z. The was already there. Okay, so they didn't create an sound to replace the a, or to replace the r, because it was already zebra, but they did delete the r. So this would actually be cluster reduction. So that's why you really have to kind of like say every word in your mouth, like bruh, like what changed? What did I do different with my tongue? Where is my tongue? What did the word sound like before? What did it sound like after? Are all of the letter sounds and the phonemes present except for one? Or did I maybe remove one and add one? Because that's now we're looking at two processes. You really have to feel it in your mouth. And that's going to help guide you to make probably the most correct answer. So, and like here, I think someone said like just omitted. Um, while technically, yes, we did omit something, that is not a phonological process. So we need to say what. Yes, we omitted something, but what letter and what was why, what process did they use to omit the letter? And so for here, it would be the cluster reduction of the R. I'm trying to think. There was something Z. Somebody said voicing. I'm not really sure. Zebra. I don't think anywhere. Oh, Z. Okay, here we go. So someone said voicing, but Z and duh are both voice sounds. So we're not voicing at any point. And then I think somebody said weak syllable deletion. That would not be accurate because both syllables are still there. Zebra, zebra, right? Okay, so ring to wing. This one is um let's see. Oh, sorry, I just had a thought. The space out a little bit. Sorry. Okay, ring to wing. Okay, so this one's gliding. Everybody did a great job. And this is that ra to wa. We're gliding with the W. All right. Vacuum to vacuum. So this one's a straightforward one. This is stopping. The buzzy sound to right? I think somebody said voicing here. This would not be voicing because the and ba are both voice sounds. So we wouldn't consider voicing because that change has not occurred. They were both voiced. Let's see. Zoo to do. Our little friend loves stopping, right? And then says this one could be a you could, and even then, this wouldn't be an affrication because, or sorry, not affrication, like a alveolarization, right? Because z and z are both alveolars. So it's just a straight up stop. Okay, five, five to pipe, five, pipe. Okay, so we v to p. We stopped that V, turned it into a P. And we also de-voiced the final consonant. So I don't know if you remember that worksheet from earlier in the semester where we talked about, manner, place, tongue position, Like what was the type of the letter sound? Where was the placement? There was that kind of like box of like a nine, a 3 by 3 chart that we had to fill out, or 4 by 4. I can't remember what it was. Um, this is where we would kind of consider multiple aspects. And so, for example, while it's just one change, two things are happening. So, five to five, right? Yes, only one letter changed to one letter, one phoneme to one phoneme, but we stopped the V to a P, to P. And we also, in the same instance, took a voiced sound, a the sound, and replaced it with a D voiced sound, a P. So even though we're just changing one letter, it's actually two processes. Okay. Um, let's see. I think someone said this was a penthesis, but that wouldn't be appropriate here. Um, and then someone said final consonant addition. That wouldn't be right because we're not adding an extra consonant, right? We are just changing it. So this would not be an addition. Okay, brush. This one was kind of funny. I don't know how it was looking on your guys' page, and there is a chance that sometimes, unfortunately, APA will like shift around a little bit. Um, but there's that big long S sound that looks kind of like this. That is actually the IPA symbol for sh. So even though it looks like an S, it was actually symbolizing the SH sound. So that did not change. So brush turned into blush. The SH is present in both sounds. Um, what she did do is she glided. And here's our first appearance of another term that I could see how people would miss this, um, because we don't often think of the term cluster substitution. But several people were maybe really great at identifying cluster reductions, but maybe not so good at identifying cluster substitutions. So this is when remember, this is another word also where two things are happening. So we keep the cluster, BR, we're changing it to BW. So the cluster is still present, but they substituted a sound. So it's cluster substitution. And also in that change of just changing that R to the W, we not only cluster substituted, but we also glided. So we changed brush to blush. Okay. Let's see. So then some people were thinking, oh, maybe this is a partial cluster reduction. But I think that's because you were thinking that that symbol might have meant an S, when really that really tall, skinny S symbol stands for SH. Okay, let's see. We're at brush, and I just wanted to make sure I'm not missing anything. Brush, blush, brush. Again, someone said replace with an alveolar, but because we didn't change the S to an SH, that's not the case. And somebody, I'm gonna bring this up because even if it was a kind of a misnomer of the symbol, it's still not a correct analysis. So replacing sh to s, I think someone said that was stopping, but neither of them are stopping. They're both still in that kind of fricative category. Again, I know that's not what happened in the word. I'm just kind of thinking through this with you. If anything, it would have maintained its fricative feature, but it would have been fronted. It would have been moving from the palatal to the alveolar. That sh sound is in that kind of palatal placement. And if we were to move that forward, it still kind of keeps its characteristics. It's just moved forward. So again, that was kind of like a misunderstanding of the word, but it was worth talking about, I thought. Okay, blue for boo. Everybody did a pretty good job on this cluster reduction. One person said initial consonant deletion. That would not be the case for two reasons. First of all, um, the initial consonant is B, and the B is still there. So that would be that initial consonant deletion. Um, but even here, like, I mean, if it was blue, instead if they changed it from blue to loo, you could argue that it is both initial consonant deletion and cluster reduction because two things were happening. They deleted the initial B and did cluster reduction. But that's not what happened here. The B was still present, so this would not be initial consonant deletion. Um, cookie, cookie for tootsie. This one was fronting. Um, because you are it's moving that k sound forward to. And you could also argue that this is like assimilation, like where there's two sounds that are like one sound is coming, so we kind of just matched the two sounds. Okay, so crown for town. Again, k to t. So that's crown to town. And then also we have cluster reduction because it's not crown to trown and keeping the R, it just got simplified to the T. Seven is Tebben. So that one was our favorite word that we need to start getting really good at using, stopping, and S to a T. Um, I'm gonna look at this, see what seven to Tebben. Um, and then someone said simplified syllables, but that would not be the case because the syllables are the same. Seven to Tebben. Okay. Cheese to tease. We stopped that affricate ch to t. And actually, we did something else. Cheese, and we also stopped the final S. Cheese to t, right? Um, and so I'm looking at this one. This is one of our ones where it says they deaffricated the CH. Um, yes. But also a lot of times when you like deaffricate, you're almost thinking more like taking that cha to a sh sound. Maybe this is more in the field because I do see some resources that say, oh, that's deaffrication. But it's also kind of front like cheese to tease. That's more like stopping, whereas cheese to cheese, it's kind of keeping that same placement. Like the ch and the sh are in the same place, but one is deaffricated, right? One is it takes that kind of an affricate is the combination of a fricative with a stop. It's like the stop and then the plosive, whereas a fricative is just shh. Okay, so that's what I think of more when I think of deaffrication. And probably more accurately taking a cha to a ta is stopping something that had a fricative element and just chopping off that fricative element and making a stop. So I would say that's probably the more common response that you would get for that, or the more common identification. I'm not going to fully say it's wrong because I know some resources would call that like a deaffricate as well. But that's one of those ones where you might want to cover your bases and maybe include both terms. But also, if you're like in a testing scenario, which one is more correct? Like a deaffricate would be more correct if we were comparing CH to SH, but when comparing CH to T, it might be more accurate to use the stopping idea. Um, okay, star for tau. Let's see, stopping. This one was stopping because we stopped S. But we also reduced a cluster because we stopped that S, turned it into a T, but we also reduced an S and a T. Now, this is different than a digraph because this is a true cluster. Like you can have an S in isolation, you can have a T in isolation, and you can have an ST. Whereas the TH sound, it it kind of is just it's a more common phoneme, especially in English, where that is a that kind of like stands on its own. Like there's words that frequently just use that as opposed to like modifying it. So um that one is star for tar. So we cluster reduce and stopped. And here's another one of those ones where I know it kind of caught a few people out. Um, they didn't delete the R, they vowelized the R because that's that star for tau. So they're putting an ending sound on it, even though it's a vowelized sound. It's not deleting the final placement or final consonant. They're actually trying to replace it with something. So that's when it kind of becomes more of that vowelization. Now, if they said star, let's keep it the same. Let's say star. Let's keep the st. If it was star for sta, then that's final consonant deletion. But if it's star for stow, that's vowelization. Okay, let's see. And again, I think this is one where we say we omitted the R, like, yes, but what did they do? Why did they omit it? What was the process? Swing for ting. This one is, and I'll let you guys think about it because we had a very similar one just up above. This was also, we changed swing to ting. So we stopped it and cluster reduced it. Um, let's see. Swing for ting. And somebody put fronting, but in this case that would not be correct because s is an alveolar and t is an alveolar. So they're not fronting, it's actually staying in the exact same spot. It's just turning from a fricative to a stop. Okay, that, that for dat. Again, there's that buzz, the to duh, so it's stopping. And somebody said that. Somebody said it was voiceless, but this is where we want to say things out loud. Because if you're reading it, you might skip over some of these things, but the, there are two phonemes for TH. There is a voiced TH and an unvoiced TH. So this is actually a voiced TH that was then replaced by a voiced D. So they were both voiced. So this would not be devoicing. And then last but not least, we have truck for twat. Okay. So we didn't omit the R for cluster reduction, right? We didn't say truck for tut or truck for tuck. We said truck for twat. We created another cluster, a different cluster with a W instead of an R. So this would be that cluster substitution, again, that I was talking about earlier. And then also because we're replacing the R with the W, now we are gliding. And then last but not least, the truck for twuck. So let's just go ahead and pretend they said truck for trut. The k in the velar moved to the t, t. So we fronted the sound. Okay, I think everybody did a pretty good job on the consonants and the vowels. I didn't get too nitpicky with this one. Like if everybody was like kind of close, by you're off by like a count or here or there, that realistically, I mean, we want to be as accurate as we can on these assignments, but that will even happen in the field. So that's something where you have like something called inter-observer agreement, because you might still understand the concept but like miss a count here or miss a count here, and that's why it's good to have kind of maybe two raters compare. But yeah, I think for the most part, if you guys did the tallies for all three sections, you were fine. And then I think I only really highlighted it if like you were maybe missing a lot of the letter identifications to a point where I'm like, well, you're maybe kind of missing the concept of this. Now, for the paper analysis, everybody did a really good job. I think a tricky one there, especially how the assignment was worded, um, was how to decide what to start with. And again, and I think many of you saw this. Um, no clinical judgment is 100% the only way. I mean, sometimes things are blatantly wrong, but sometimes if you can like justify it pretty well, and you have good reasoning, you can maybe like argue the point. So really for this one, and this is a good topic, not only for this assignment to consider, because I'm going to talk about some specific points, but this is where I'm saying describe, describe, describe. Use evidence, evidence, evidence. Because almost think of yourself as like a lawyer on a court case. Lawyers go in, there's the, prosecutor and the defender. And both are trying to be more right. And the person who wins the case is the one that has the most evidence, can make the most plausible argument, and can back up previous cases, previous citations, and everything to the point where somebody's like, yeah, that actually makes sense. And that person wins. So I think when you are, for any assignments where I'm like, describe, 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 because I want to think, understand what you're thinking. Because even though you might choose something that is not the common approach, or a less common approach, or maybe a less preferred approach, if you can explain why you think this is most beneficial for this student and really back it up, as well as consider maybe why you didn't choose to do this, this, and this, and this, even though maybe these were better or more common answers, and you're sticking with this first answer, but you can explain why you didn't choose this, that's going to fortify your answer. Um, for example, one student, I think it was like the only student who, and so you'll probably know who you are, who didn't get any sort of feedback on this one. They had a really good argument. So even though I wouldn't have chosen maybe their selection in isolation, I can't remember what they chose, but they chose something like they didn't choose like stopping, which we'll talk about why that one is kind of like borderline. They chose something else, but they backed up their answer. They were saying, this is, developmentally inappropriate at this age, even though like maybe the person, the error amount was only like 6 times. So it's like, okay, it's impacting intelligibility, but it's not the end of the world, right? But it was developmentally inappropriate. It was a more atypical error. And this person used research to say that when we choose atypical errors, which we'll talk about in a second, when we choose those atypical phonological processes, that's when we see the broader phonological wide scale change that actually affects multiple other sounds. So initially, I wouldn't have maybe picked this phoneme. I wish I remembered what it was. The student is going to know who it is, because I think you're the only one who didn't get really kind of like feedback on this one. Um, why I wouldn't have picked that, because I would have thought, that's not going to give me my most bang for my buck. They were right. It was developmentally delayed. It was an atypical phoneme. It is going to have wide sweeping change, and they even included um, paraphrase, not quite a paraphrase, really well paraphrase explanation from a legitimate research-based source saying why choosing a phoneme like this would be correct. So that person got it right, right? Um, so that's a talk for this assignment, but it's just something that, like, if you see me saying too brief, please explain your reasoning, include um, research-based evidence. Don't just give me a citation, but what did the citation say? Back up your thinking, because the more we do that, the more we're thinking like a clinician. Because again, I'm just to summarize, sometimes there is no hard and fast yes or no or correct answer. So we really need to be able to weigh the pros and cons, think through, use what we know, and think through what we think is best for this child and make an executive decision. But we can only do that if we're really reasoning through, describing through, backing it up with research-based evidence. Um, okay, so let's see. Oh, so okay, let's talk about percent consonants correct. You guys did a really good job on this. But I think some people maybe kind of overcounted, and so I'm going to highlight the points why. You might have overcounted if you used affricates, which we were talking about earlier, or digraphs, because like cha and ja, we would not uh, even though it's CH, we wouldn't count the CH as two consonants. We would count that as one phoneme, right? So that might have like raised your count. And again, digraphs like sh, think when you're doing when you're doing percent consonant correct, think IPA. So if it has an IPA symbol, it's most likely a phoneme or one phoneme sound. So SH we would count as one, TH we would count as one, NG we would count as one. Um, and I mean, yes, we would kind of analyze that, like if they drop the G from an N, you know, they that is something else. They like deleted a sound, but really they changed that to right? So that's one sound that was incorrectly replaced for one sound. So for example, in thumb, if they say thumb, there's th, which is one sound, and which is another sound. Even though it's thumb, it's thumb, and we don't say the b, it's silent. So it's really that th and the sound. So if they change it from thumb to thumb, the M is correct in both placements, even though the spelling is different. But what they changed is they changed TH to an F. Okay, so that would be 50% consonant correct because of the two phoneme sounds, not spelling, of the two phoneme sounds, one of them was incorrect. So then that would be 50%. Hopefully that helps to kind of clear that up a little bit. But you guys did an amazing job, and I think you did a really good job talking about the percent consonant correct severity scale. Even people were saying the counts were a little off, or maybe percentages were a little high. Everybody was pretty accurate in saying it was less than that 50% correct, so it would fall into that kind of severe category. Okay, clinical decision making. So this is where we're going to really, I think a lot of you did do this to some extent, but we are going to consider like multiple things when we're deciding when to treat. We're going to consider targets that affect the most intelligibility, um, but also really when we think about intelligibility, not only do we want to think about like high occurrence rates, which that is definitely a phoneme. That's why everybody, even if I made a comment, you still got like a really high score on it. Like stopping, yes, the child stopped crazy amounts of time, so that's a lot, that's going to impact intelligibility. But it's also kind of like a common sound because it's developmentally appropriate at some point in time. I can't remember, I'll have to double check when that, let's see, stopping. I think it's fine up until about 3.5. So since our like ears are kind of trained to that, it's not going to it will affect intelligibility due to the high prevalence, but it's not going to, like, people will still be able to kind of understand. Whereas let's see. I just want to see something real quick. Stop it. Okay. I said something and you guys are going to catch me on that. But so the stopping process is normal. I think it's normal up until 5. This was just saying stopping of certain letters. So now I'm kind of seeing why some of you guys said 3. But either well, the kind of the reflection still stays the same. But stopping in general is kind of normal up to age 5. So since she was 5'4", it's like, yes, it is now inappropriate. But when we're making, another thing we consider when we're making clinical decision making is like how inappropriate, like how much delayed. If someone is still using a phonological process from 2 years ago, yes, that is serious. If it's 6 months, we'll probably end up treating it. You know, in a couple months. Like it will probably most likely, there's a chance that it could fix itself in 2 or 3 months, but it's still kind of in that grace period window. Now, if we're already, this is kind of like, again, thinking through the clinical judgment making. So if it was just that, if it was just doing the one thing and it was within 4 months of being just past normal, maybe they wouldn't qualify for that. This is where we talked about using that clinical judgment making, right? For like evaluations, for example. But if there's multiple sounds that the child is doing, like obviously our child here, then you could, like, if she's already qualified for speech therapy, like you're not going to not work on stops just because she has 2 more months to work on it, right? So it's that's more for like eligibility, but again, I'm really just presenting concepts to you, and you can think through them and decide what you think about it. But these are the clinical decision making kind of things that we're thinking about. So, what most affects intelligibility, but also what most affects intelligibility and is like most atypical, because a really atypical substitution, such as initial consonant deletion, that's never appropriate at any stage, that might affect it more because not only is it really showing this child is having phonological issues because they're just making up phonological issues at this point, but also the listener is not going to be as familiar with that type of error. Like an adult would not be as familiar with that type of error. So they'd be like, really, what did you just say? You know, then we want to consider, like we were talking about, atypical and non-developmental processes early. So backing, even though we do see it, it's considered atypical because it's not a natural process of phonological development. Like like early on, let's think of a normal one. Final consonant deletion. That's normal. That's normal up until I guess even age 4 potentially. It typically suppresses at 3. So if it's still there at 3.5 and 4, that's when we would treat. So I correct myself. It actually suppresses till at 3, and then if it's still there at 3.5 or 4 years, that's when we would treat. Um, but it's a normal process, so we're like not as worried about that. But backing, even though we do see that definitely our elementary kids, that is kind of never normal. So that would kind of be your flag for, ooh, that's one of our atypical ones. How important is that? Should I consider treating that first? Don't know. What's the prevalence? What's the impact on intelligibility? What's the frequency rate? How old is the child? That kind of thing. And again, always considering frequency. So in general, maybe we would consider first most impact on intelligibility. So that, and again, that's up to you using what we just talked about to decide, but that would be our top priority. And kind of bonus points if it's an atypical one, because we know that that will help to, if we pick these kind of like atypical, more severe phonological process and we treat it, that could have that kind of global sweeping positive effects on the other sounds. Next, we would also kind of consider the atypical, which is kind of what I was just saying. And then next priority would be most frequently occurring. So if they're all kind of normal errors, but there's a really frequent one, yeah, let's target that one first. But if there's a really frequent error, but it's not really impacting intelligibility, but these are like really distorted and strange and they really impact intelligibility, even though they occur less often, we would maybe consider treating that first. Okay, so that is a lot of information. Now, I don't actually think I'm going to review the phonological processes chart that I'm going to provide with this video, but go through and think through the sounds. Say them out loud. Here, is it voiced? Is it unvoiced? Is my tongue in the back? Is it moving forward? Is it like going from a th to a ta? Like is that one change? Is that two changes? Really go case by case by case and think through it, because that is where you're going to really get that understanding of what you are seeing, what you are hearing. It's going to make you better at identifying multiple issues that are co-occurring. Um, and finally, just kind of remember talking about that. Just when you're notating, I saw a couple people in the discussion boards. They were, I could tell that they were thinking correctly, but they flipped the sound. So if you say like dwum for drum, you want the first word, the word for word, the first word is that incorrect sound. So we wouldn't say drum for dwum because we're not trying to change drum to dumb. We're trying to change, or what's incorrect about the pronunciation is that we accidentally, maybe fill in the blank, we accidentally said dwum for drum. So just kind of remember that order. I think most of you guys got that, but I saw that, and I don't want you guys to ever, accidentally get marked down in the future just because that order wasn't kind of clear in your head. So, this is a long mini lecture, but I feel like it's a good point in the semester just to kind of like touch in on these things, because it is, this starts in phonology. Like phonology is a huge factor of what we are talking about in this class. So this is a great review of how we should be thinking about it, what the sounds are, how do we detect, what are our detective skills, how are we using research-based education and sources to form our decisions. If we're making a borderline choice, like I said, in submitting to insurance, if you can defend your choice, it's borderline. But if you can defend why and use research to back it up, they could very likely approve it. So, anyways, I hope you guys found this helpful. I know this is a long one, but I think it was a good point in the semester to do it. I think you guys have, or maybe some of y'all are starting your midterm. So, good luck, good luck, good luck. Do not forget to use that proctor because that is required and it will invalidate your test scores. Maybe could have led the talk with that, but I did a post on it, so you should know. But use the proctor. Make sure you study. Good luck. Let's regroup after you guys take the midterm. All right. Bye. Oh, and happy Halloween.